All right, we're live. Um,
Are
I'll
we?
send you. Yeah, I'll send you the link.
Took a horrible picture to put on the account of my microphone, and it's like absolute garbage. Ugh. Oh, let me get that before it disappears. Did that last time. Okay, sweet. Only turn off the sound. Fantastic. So yes, we are live. So what's up?
Well, let's just briefly talk about the North Korea situation since in the past, I don't know, I want to say the month, it's just escalated much more than it has in the previous, I don't
Yeah,
know.
I mean, so I'll just begin. Hi everyone who's watching. This is political tournaments usually, but we're just gonna be talking about North Korea for an hour. Hopefully, it's not too boring, bringing you some information and just discussing the potential of the situation. So, I mean, to start off, I think it's really interesting because I always feel that, look, if North Korea, I was reading this report by a professor, a history professor who is sorry, hold on. Yeah, was that your sound?
Hmm?
Never mind. Sorry, I some sound is going off. So I was reading this report, and it was by a historian professor at Harvard, who has his master's degree and as a historian, and he was talking about how there's three scenarios that can actually play out when it comes to the conflict with North Korea. So the first one is that the North Korean people, Kim Jong Un launches an attack on a U.S. ally, and in that case, basically it will become a proxy war where the United States will probably give support to South Korea, and the same will be said with China to North Korea. The second possibility is where North Korea attacks the United States, and as the historian put it, China will not even be able to get an army together before the United States has wiped North Korea off the map, because I don't think there'd be any tolerance with that. And then the third scenario is where we initiate the attack, which I don't think is likely, but if we did initiate the attack, he believes that it would once again become a proxy war in between, China, North Korea, South Korea, and the United States, which is interesting.
Right.
So, I personally feel that, North Korea knows that once they attack, if they attack, that it's going to be over for them, because the United States and even China has started pulling back their economic ties with North Korea. They've started pulling back their sanctions, and I feel that North Korea knows that once they attack us, it's going to be game over for them. And trying to attack Guam, I feel like if they had the capabilities to reach mainland United States, if they really wanted a last huzzah for whatever reason, they would attack the mainland United States. Also, another thing to note, that I was reading an article, and the statement from North Korea was that if they were to, send a warning to the United States, it wasn't actually an attack on Guam. It was shooting missiles off the coast of Guam at Guam, just off the coast. So anyway.
Well, here's the reason why. Also, the United States are going to have to try to refrain from initiating attack to North Korea, since, especially if it does turn nuclear. Here's the reason why we can't, because the Korean Peninsula is the size of it's a little over the size of New Jersey, the state of New Jersey, and so basically we're by that theory, if we launch an attack on Pyongyang, that also means that there's going to be some overlap, and we're not going to be able to contain the nuclear attack on Pyongyang. Chances are it will overlap into South Korea and will damage a lot of South Korean civilians, and so that's the reason why this is also such a difficult issue, is because there's not a lot of options that America can kind of act on, because a lot of the things that America does to North Korea are also going to act upon South Korea. And
Right.
so if this war does end up happening, this may have to be a war fought from the Korean Peninsula, from the south up to the north. I don't think it can necessarily be intercontinental war, since that would also mean damaging the South Korean
Right. Yeah.
country.
Yeah. I
So
mean, a lot of the military that South Korea has is backed by the United States. I
right.
think we have about 50,000 soldiers on the DMZ. I mean, we have a lot of support in there. something interesting, I think that is if we would go to combat with North Korea, which I mean, I've bet my friends, I think that we will go to war with North Korea during either its presidency or just in the next year. I really think we will. I think that whatever side initiates it, it will start with destroying their launching platforms for their missiles, whether it be nuclear warheads or just their intercontinental missiles, their ICBMs that they have. I think that will be the first step, and then the second step would, because we have to realize that North Korea has, other than their missile programs, that overhang, that underlying threat of nuclear war. I mean, they're not strong. Their whole military is malnourished. Ground war wise, without their missiles and without their nukes, North Korea is nothing. And so I feel that if there was a conflict in which the United States would attempt to go in, take out Kim Jong-un and implement either, a temporary president or try to implement elections into the system, which once again, I think would be hard, and we can talk about it later, but it'd be hard because, they've been brainwashed their whole life. But anyway, I think that the possibility it would start with, destroying, where they shoot off their missiles and the only power that they actually have as a country. And then after that, going into ground war, I think it would take honestly a week. I mean,
Right. But it's honestly very it's very it's controversial, and it's kind of, I don't know, lopsided, I want to say, because as this tension between America and North Korea is actually developing, the tension between North and South Korea is actually reducing. And so, this obviously, the tensions between North and South Korea are still very tight. But it is something to note that, South Korea and North Korea have both been, diplomats from both areas have been taking action in order to try to, calm down the situation between them, and hopefully, combine eventually into a single Korean peninsula, which I don't think anybody opposes that on either side, whether it be, America,
Right.
North Korea, or South Korea. But it's a situation though that America should handle really smartly, though, because level-headed people in in the top related posts in the U.S. government, they're gonna. You want leading subject matter experts running Asia policy in departments of state and defense, right? And so, someone who knows the South Korean government, serving in Seoul, is probably going to have the best situation and knowledge on North Korea. And so, the fact that I do think the fact that that both sides are kind of in a process of trading threats is premature. I do think that Trump is doing the right thing, though, that of kind of establishing U.S. ground, standing firm in our position and not backing down. That was one of the reasons why Obama wasn't a great president, in terms of foreign policy, was because he kept getting bullied by the people around him, or countries around him, let's say. And so I do think it's a really good idea that Trump is standing firm in the ground. And I do, although it might seem, kind of a passive kind of tactic, I do believe that it's the best idea for America to kind of just wait this out, see what North Korea does. And honestly, I don't think we should initiate an attack until North Korea actually poses to be like an imminent threat to.
Right. Well, see, now here's
States.
the question. So, and I know what you're saying, because obviously we are met with sorry, I was reading something. Sorry, I just got I got a DM on the page. So just something to point out. I think that we are at a high level of scrutiny as a world power, and arguably the largest world power. And I do agree that there's very few instances, I think, where we would initiate the conflict itself. But I do, because I feel that under Trump, absolutely. And Mattis and stuff, that if there was to be an attack on U.S. soil, I mean, Trump, when he responded to that threat, he said that they will be met with hell and fire, not if they attack, but he said that if there's any more threats. So I feel that, when it comes to the United States being attacked first, I mean, absolutely, within minutes, there's going to be, people getting set there, and, it's going to be over. But as for us attacking first, because I do feel that there is a threat. I think that the threat is imminent, and whether or not they're actually going to attack, because remember, it doesn't just impact us; it impacts Japan, Australia, South Korea, China, a lot of the economies over there. So I think that if they're is actually going to be, a conflict which it poses a threat to the United States. I think that the only way that it's actually going to be initiated is if they strike first.
Right. And I mean, it's really a difficult situation, and it's something that if we do end up going to war with North Korea, we as being the United States, if we end up going to war with North Korea, and it turns out exactly like it did in the original Korean War, where everybody kind of stayed at the stalemate. This could possibly be a turning point in terms of relations with South Korea and America, because
Right.
it's really a tricky situation because America's really going to have to play their cards right, and they're going to have to make every move perfect. An Atlantic magazine predicted that if America were to go, if North Korea, America, and South Korea were to engage in another Korean War, the South would lose about 100,000 people, and even if tensions between North Korea and America rose, and it was just let's say it was just a war between North Korea and America, which is unlikely, but let's just say hypothetically, they
Right.
did predict that at least 10,000 civilians in South Korea were going to be killed in the
Right.
effort. So it's really a tricky situation. If we do end up going to war, which at this point seems really likely. Let's be honest. Like at this point, it seems North Korea is pissed off as hell about sanctions being placed on everything, and everybody
Right.
pulling out of trade. And so if North Korea decides to make the move of going to war, we something we need to really heavily consider is refraining from nuclear war, because that is going to be devastating not only for North Korea, but also for South Korea.
Right.
And it's not something that obviously South Korea is not going to be very happy with the decision that North Korea ends up, or America ends up making, if they do end up going to a nuclear war. So it is a difficult situation, but and there are going to be lots of minute details that they're going to have to get perfectly. But if we do go to war, which seems likely, I think it's a good idea we fight from the south up.
Yeah.
But what I kind of want to look at though is China. And so one of the reasons, throughout, like the 80 years of tension between, America, North Korea, South Korea, and everybody,
Mhm.
the reason why America has the number one reason, let's be honest, the number one reason why North America has not taken action to take care of North Korea is because China stands right in the middle between them.
Right.
And so I think that's also something that they need to consider. And like you said, China did,
Right.
kind of they're starting to steadily pull out of trade
Oh
with
yeah.
North Korea. But something I think we should discuss is why is China doing enough? And if so, do you think
Mhm.
China should be doing any more to, let's say, punish its North Korean ally? Because
Right.
if North Korea decides to attack America, we're not looking at a two country catastrophe. We're looking at a global catastrophe here, because
Right.
we're talking
Okay.
about,
So
yeah.
yeah, let me talk about that. So I'm just gonna answer that, and then there's a couple questions in the chat, and then we'll answer those. But so historically, China has been on the side of North Korea.
Mm,
The proxy war, the Korean War that we fought, that was China versus the United States, right? So I think historically they have had a strong position behind North Korea, but what we've seen, not over the past just couple of years, but over the past couple of weeks, sanctions have been placed, in unanimous votes by the UN from China and Russia. What we are saying is that, we're seeing that we continue to see, sorry, I'm just distracted by the chat. China continues basically to, withdraw their connections, because what we have to understand is that China makes up 70% of North Korean trade, right? They have no
right.
other trade. And even that trade between North Korea and China is very minimal. And even if we did go into a proxy war between the United States, South Korea, and North Korea and China, even $1 billion worth of fighting for China won't be economically justified based off of their actual trading and the deficit that North Korea has compared to China.
Right. Go ahead. No.
No, sorry. Okay. So I'm sorry, I was just reading the chat. So I'm gonna answer one of the questions from chat that someone's saying. So,
Yep.
Com- Comrade Hecko says, "Would you support the DPRK against U.S. imperialism?" So, well, obviously we have a position on that. Well, with imperialism, there's a stance that the left tries to take where they, try to make the claim that North Korea is retaliating to the United States in, their imperialism, across the world. But, that simply isn't true. Anna from the Young Turks actually in her debate with Ann Coulter tried to make this point even at Politicon a couple of days ago. They try to bring up this, this untrue point that either North Korea is responding to U.S. aggression, but that just isn't true because, North Korea has been warmongering and fear-mongering for decades. This isn't a recent thing.
Ever since the Kim Il-sung dynasty.
Right. In the United States, it's obvious that they're trying to take a position, as being someone who sorry, the chat. I need to block out the chat. It's distracting me. Just when when you look at it historically, basically North Korea has always been an aggressor, and while they may be a lot weaker than almost all countries in the world, realistically, they're still a threat because one nuke, one explosion anywhere, can do a lot of damage. And so to say that the United States is the aggressor and North Korea is responding, that's just ridiculous. Because only up until years ago we have been actually attempting to implement these sanctions. I just listened to an interview in 1999 with Donald Trump. I think it was with the New York Times, and he talked about how, even back in 1999, they were talking about how in the next few years, North Korea could have nuclear weapons. And even back then, they weren't taking the right steps under the Clinton administration to do so. So, it simply isn't U.S. aggression. And anyone who claims that, I don't want to say that, they're necessarily, because obviously they're leftists, and I don't want to say that they're, appealing to North Korea. But, it's trying to justify something that it doesn't hold justification.
Right. Now, we were talking about North Korea making the first move on the United States, and that's the only reason why America would have justification for retaliating back against North Korea. This is a recent report from CNN about an hour ago. North Korea. It says here, North Korea is seriously examining a plan to launch a missile strike targeting an area near the United States territory of Guam in response to President Donald Trump's warning to Pyongyang that any additional threats will be met with fire and fury. And so, thoughts? I mean, if North Korea does end up hitting Guam, Guam's population is 160,000. It's filled with naval bases, Air Force bases, and so we're attacking. If North Korea attacks Guam, it's strategically, pretty smart, right? It's military. It's really military packed, and sending an attack on Guam would, in my opinion, I think it would send the right message to the United States. But thoughts on this? I mean.
Well, so okay, so I the stance, like I said, if they're going to attack the United States, if they want to have a last, attack on the United States before, they're wiped out in a couple of weeks, maybe a week, they are going, look, it's a scare tactic. Kevin, as he says in the chat, it makes sense what they are doing. It's a tactic to stay, isolated as a nation in order to not, be subject to invasion. Because whether or not they have nuclear weapons, which, we believe they do, we're not sure. Even if they don't, it's still a way for them to remain isolated. But I just want to go back to the chat because he, Comrade Hecko said something, back when the Korean War started, it is true that historically the Republic of Korea, South Korea, initiated the fighting. However, what I have to say to that is that, once again, it was a proxy war. And if they want to point fingers to someone based on the starting of the Korean War and this conflict, you have to point fingers at China. Because if they are the ones who hypothetically were, the proxy behind the start of the Korean War, right? But the United States was backing South Korea, and if South Korea attacked first, then that means that the ones that actually got them into the conflict in the first place were China, who was backing North Korea. So if you really want to point fingers at who the aggressor has been over the last couple of decades, it has to be pointed at China, which, really wouldn't make any sense, obviously, because North Korea is one of the only, territories in the world that is one of the only countries in the world that trades very little with outside resources, and they only trade with China. And I think they may trade a little bit with Japan, but I mean, it's barely any, if any, trading. So
Right.
I'm just gonna bring up another question if you want to answer it. McCoat says, do you think North Korea's recent rapid developments in their nuclear technology are natural, North Korea developing by themselves, or is there someone else who is helping them in the last few months or years? That's a good question.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think nuclear technology. I don't think in terms of nuclear technology, I don't think that's a very well guarded secret. I'm going to be honest.
Right.
North Korea has the resources. That's an obvious fact. North Korea has the resources to develop nuclear technology. They were up till maybe 2 or 3 months ago, North Korea was severely behind in terms of technology, and quite frankly,
Right.
the American people were laughing at them just because of how much they were failing. But
Yeah, absolutely.
that's an interesting question that you bring up. Is someone aiding North Korea in nuclear developments? For right now, I want to say no, because North Korea's relation with every other country at right now is just as good as North Korea's relation with America. Quite to be honest,
Yeah, it's non-existent.
yes, unless we're looking at China, I don't think that. Quite frankly, I find that very unlikely that China would be aiding North Korea in nuclear technology. As I think China is also very aware of what North Korea is capable of, and the firepower that North Korea is going to be able to unleash. But I
see now. Okay. Yep. Sorry.
I mean, it's. All right, go ahead. Yeah.
All right. So I just wanted to respond to something, and it just goes on with a continued talking about who is the aggressor. So as Comrade Hecko says, I don't know if this is true, but it says North Korea's policy is that they will not attack first. So let's say that in the hypothetical situation, this is true. North Korea will not attack first, right? It doesn't matter because there's obvious justification, whether it be from the United States or the UK or South Korea or Japan, to intervene, because it's not like we're just targeting a nation. It's not like we just have problems with someone like the United Kingdom, right? And we are threatening to attack and they're threatening to attack. That's not how it works. This is a dictatorship government, right? That has ruled for years under the Un family, right? Excuse me, the Kim, oh God, the Kim family, right? Yeah, I'm sorry. And so it has ruled for decades under this family, right? And it has not only been abusive and violated so many international laws, but it has continued to do this. It has continued to be warmongering, whether or not you think that they are going to strike first. The government itself, so Comrade Hecko says the DPRK has broken all out. That's just not true. They malnourish. I mean, first off, they have horrible torture methods that aren't justified under the UN or the World Health Organization. Nothing that's even justified. They've had major famines in the past. They've continued to starve their individuals. They've told lies that not are just on the surface, but they have continued to, just say these terrible lies that are just brainwashing, quite frankly, the government. It's an Orwellian society where they don't know, they're told that they win the World Cup in soccer when they literally just, just qualified for the match. I mean, we have proven that in North Korea and in these plantations, there's torture. Yeah, I mean, it's I'd assume you read the book 1984. It was written in 1948. It depicts a society almost similar to North Korea, or by George Orwell, and that's exactly the society they're living in. There's absolute justification for doing it. So when you may make the claim that the United States has the same torturing methods. If the United States is torturing something, we're a first world country. We follow the UN and the WHO and all these international laws and policies. We are interrogating people based off their criminal status, whether it be they're terrorists or domestic terrorists. There's justification for that. When you have a country that interrogates and tortures its citizens and malnourishes them and continues to try to keep power in a country with less than 20% arable land, that has starvation, that is just a terrible country to live in, there's no justification for it anymore. It's not just a factual justification, it's also just a moral justification.
Yeah.
And as long as we continue to let this country live, it will continue to allow abuse, because you can make the claim that, oh, I'm lying, we don't know if there's malnourishment. Well, you have to tell that to the people who have been tortured by the government. You have to tell that by not only U.S. citizens that have gone there and been tortured and come back, but escapees from North Korea, because I doubt the thousands and thousands that have escaped, all these masses are going to be lying about what they experienced there, especially since, a lot of the time they can barely speak English. I mean, it's ridiculous to try to justify anything the DPRK does, or even try to justify in the slightest that they are a peaceful nation, because they're not.
And I kind of want to talk about the media of North Korea. It's something that you brought up pretty briefly, and it's something that that Comrade Hecko kind of talked about, I think. So the media of North Korea is amongst the most strictly controlled in the world, if not the most strictly controlled in the world. The Constitution of North Korea, like Hecko, I believe, stated earlier, the Constitution normally provides for freedom of speech and the press, right? But the government prohibits the exercise of these rights in practice, unless it's in the form of praising the country and its government and its leader. That's a fact. That's something that's been stated constantly by people that have gone to North Korea, people that have escaped from North Korea. And the government not only tightly controls all the information coming in and out of the country, but it also seeks to mold the information at its source. Like you stated, North Korea wins the World Cup when they were disqualified, etc. There are countless other examples in which, if I took the time to look them up, I could find them. A typical example of this was when actually a really famous example of this was when Kim Jong-il passed away, news of which was not divulged until 2 days after it occurred. Kim Jong-un, who was replaced his father as leader, has given every indication that he will largely follow in his father's footsteps. But new technologies are being made more rapidly, freely available in the country. But it's still in the form, for example, let's say like media outlets, mobile phones, etc. But those are coming in, years and years later than, they have come in, let's say, America and, the rest of the world. The free speech media is so strictly controlled in the world that it's insane. I think this is something that I read over here. Let me try to find it. So there are 5 major television stations in North Korea. Korean Central TV, Mansudae TV, Yeongmyeonsan TV, Kaesong Television, and Sport Television. So the Korean Central TV is government propaganda. It's North Korea, kissing its own ass. Mansudae Television is an educational system which is only available in Pyongyang. It teaches it's education, but it's strictly based on only North Korean views. So if we say, so let's say we're teaching history, right? It'll teach that America is, a complete, jackass, and they're completely unjustified, and, they're acting in the same way that, let's say, we view North Korea. Rungminsan TV is also a very similar educational and cultural network. Kaesong Television is a program that targets South Korea and basically berates them constantly. Sport Television is where they lie about the World Cup. And so, we see how much North Korea is completely controlling the media. I'm reading the chat right now.
I know.
I mean, I don't see how it's factual. It's completely factual that North Korea is controlling its media. It's completely factual that everything that North Korea is doing justifies action from America, South Korea, Japan, and its allies. So the fact that North Korea has been for the existence of their country for 70 something years, the fact that the North Korea has been threatening South Korea and America for 70 plus years gives complete justification in itself of America acting back and striking back, and even South Korea and invading North Korea. But the fact that we don't is because there are a variety of reasons, foreign policy, regarding maybe China. But, the fact that, Comrade Hecko, the fact that you're saying that there's no justification for America, possibly retaliating against North Korea, that's completely false. That's absolutely false.
Right. So, he DM'd me and he told me he wanted me to debate an individual who actually has access to Instagram, I believe, and he lives in North Korea, and his page is like North Korea Ball, because the country balls on Instagram. It's like a whole thing. People have different, balls. It represents their country or state or whatever, and they run accounts. So if this individual, as Comrade Hecko claims, is truly living in North Korea and can vouch for the kindness and generosity of North Korea, I mean, you have to be absolutely kidding me if you think that that is any clear evidence. We all know that they have propaganda, right? Not on just, a local or state scale, but on a national scale. They attempt to paint this utopian picture of their society that's factual. And to say that someone who lives in the country, who has access to something as precious as an Instagram account, is not going to be speaking well about the country. I mean, like, I just can't understand that lack of, like, intelligence that you have to think that that is a warranting piece of evidence. It isn't. I mean, what we see is that through these different, restraints on different types of, internet, on, stuff, just social media, stuff we see every day, restraints on everything, that's the propaganda. So just quickly, I want to say, I was watching a TED Talk, and it had to do with this American teacher, and he went over on a mission trip to North Korea, and he actually taught a class of guys for, I think, 3 months. And he was teaching them in English, and he was teaching them basic stuff. And, his firsthand testimony, and not just his testimony, but many others show that, they don't have access to a lot of things, right? There's a very small, extremely small privileged class in Pyongyang that has access to the, North Korean sanctioned internet, very little things. Other than that, the rest of the country not only doesn't have access to internet, but it doesn't have access to water, to electricity, a lot of resources. So, to make the claim that someone under strict watch from North Korea, who I looked at his account, posts nothing but positive support for North Korea, to say that he is going to justify the generosity of North Korea, I mean, that's just stupid.
He himself, I don't know if you saw brainwashed.
Right. Oh, and not even brainwashed, because even, I mean, he could be brainwashed. Even if he isn't brainwashed, which, I assume that he obviously has been through his years, conditioned to a certain point. But even if he isn't, and he's aware, of, the country being bad and what he lives in, obviously, if he's being monitored, and if this is true that he lives in North Korea and he has an Instagram account, and, the objective maybe by the North Korean government is to show a better side of North Korea, obviously he's going to speak well about it. So if you want to go past, because look, I understand, when I look at people trying to justify North Korea and try to say the United States is wrong, I see that it's not based on, an argument, but it's more based on conspiracy theory like 9/11 or, like the moon landing. There's so much factual evidence that points to the fact that North Korea is a terrible country. It's horrible to its citizens, and they're trying to nitpick very small pieces of evidence that may have a connection.
Right. And, you also bring up a point, we're talking about one person's testimony against, thousands and thousands that have been to North Korea, that have escaped from North Korea. And, I think Sam, you touched upon this very lightly, but, if you did have an Instagram in North Korea, and let's say this is a legitimate account, that this person actually does live in North Korea. I don't think that, North Korea would necessarily tolerate you completely shitting on its own government. Right. like let's be honest, North Korea, it's a fact. It's a complete fact that North Korea controls its media. It's a complete fact that North Korea, controls everything that goes in and comes out, based on social media. And so I don't think if this person actually lived in North Korea, which, I'm looking through its account.
I'll believe him, just for the sake of this argument, I'll believe him.
We'll give him the benefit of the doubt, but I'm looking through this, and it's, I'm not seeing much. I myself am Korean, but there's not a lot of evidence here that kind of states that this person is actually really from North Korea. We see a lot of things from a lot of pictures, China, relating to China. Not a lot of Korean written. I don't know. A lot of this.
I mean, look.
We'll give him the benefit. We'll give him the benefit of the doubt. All right. Well, for the sake of argument, we will. But the fact is, if you lived in North Korea, you had an Instagram account, North Korea, the government would not tolerate you, berating its own government. They would, you would only, have a. You would only have an Instagram account in North Korea if you were doing something like this, which is kissing its ass.
Exactly. I mean, look, it can't be stated enough. He said. Let me bring my mic a little closer. So he said that in the DM, he's a citizen of the DPRK. He lives there. He is in contact with DPRK organizations. and other diplomatic stuff. So he's quite qualified. I mean, how many times do we have to say it doesn't make you qualified for you to live there? Anyway, let's move on because that's just a terrible point. If you, I mean,
Well,
if you truly believe it.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
All right. So, I mean, I'll just, quickly finish up, and you can talk a little bit more about it and finish up. But so, when I find evidence, right? Well, let me explain this. If Otto, who was tortured and killed, a U.S. citizen,
what I was going to bring up.
If he was killed for just taking back a poster, wasn't even a political poster, just a poster from North Korea. He was tortured and he came back with, uncurable brain damage, and he couldn't do anything about it. Just for that, I can't imagine that even if it was positive, even if it was monitored every single text, that Instagram, not even Instagram, but North Korea would allow for that account. And even if they did, and even if this is all true, and that he lives in North Korea, and we're just talking out of our asses, and he lives in North Korea, and he's justified, in what he's saying. That doesn't mean that anything he's saying is right. And if you really believe that someone who's living in North Korea is telling you facts from that country, I mean, you must just be intellectually challenged, to be honest. So,
yeah, I mean, and Otto Warmbier is indeed, the solo example of this. There, people that have, even it's citizens that have been, been shot down, tortured, etc. And it's honestly it's a terrifying story, and
right.
I think Americans shouldn't be living in fear constantly, and be fearing for their lives. It's not something that should happen. So should we diffuse the situation? Absolutely. I don't think anybody would go against that. Should we go to war? Probably, but let's be smart about it.
Right.
And so, a lot of people are saying, that what North Korea is doing is justified, and everything they're doing is to, retaliate against what America has done to them. But my question to you is, what exactly has America literally done to them other than stay neutral and try to stay out of their business? Like, let's be honest.
Right.
What exactly has North Korea done? Or America
so what I will say, and I'll give Comrade the benefit of the doubt, they did initiate in a proxy war. And like I said, war is very confusing. It's very muddy. There's always blame on one side. I mean, after World War I, we blame Germany. Germany wasn't, the main aggressor. It's muddy. So I'd say that, stepping out of war, we haven't really been, aggressive towards them. Actually, we've been diplomatic. And so with that being said, I'm going to go to a question in the chat by Makot. Why was the Clinton nuclear deal with North Korea fail? So, and the simple reason is, so first off, Asher and I, we do debate. We are, in the debate field, and we do a lot of nuclear legislation, talk a lot about proliferation. And basically the reason why the Clinton nuclear deal, and really any nuclear deal, whether it be with Obama and Iran or any country with any nuclear weapon, is you don't have the proper enforcement. Because when you have nations that aren't allies and are on the brink of creating nuclear weapons, we obviously already don't have a lot of access, whether it be with Iran or North Korea. We don't have a lot of access on the inside, meaning that no matter what you implement, no matter what sanctions you try to impose, it's not actually going to be effective. Meaning that any nuclear deal where the only oversight that you have for the, stopping the proliferation of nukes, stopping this creation of nukes, if you have no oversight for that, and the only thing you have is potential for sanctions, if it's found out, there's no risk versus reward for these countries to not produce nuclear weapons. The reason why these nuclear deals are just unsuccessful is because they can't enforce the content of what they try to spout. And that's the downfall of a lot of policies with the United States in general and foreign policy, that we try to enforce things, but it can't be enforced unless you have, aggressive measures. Because, saying to a country who's on the brink of war and on the brink of threatening to bomb you with nuclear weaponry, telling them, hey, please don't create nuclear weapons, that's not actually going to stop them from creating nuclear weapons.
Right. And I think we also have to, in terms of why the Clinton nuclear deal failed, I think we also have to credit George W. Bush for this. I think he was really it's relatively unknown, but we do have to credit George W. Bush for, I think, a lot of it for at least slowing down North Korea and its nuclear attempts. But I mean, George W. Bush became president in 2001. We all know this. But one of the things that he talked about the most was his skeptical belief of Clinton's deal with North Korea. You know, this is a controversial deal, not only, you know, in the U.S. government, but around its citizens. You know, there's multiple, countless amounts of debate about it. But, you know, I think we do have to credit George W. Bush for slapping down the administration, and Secretary of State at the time, Colin Powell, actually even suggested that the administration follow the path of Clinton and continue its deal. And so I think we really have to look at George W. Bush as a key factor for slowing down the North Korean nuclear endeavor. But, you know, let's look at now. You know, North Korea has the firepower. North Korea has the capability of hitting Los Angeles, quite possibly Chicago and New York. They obviously are looking at, hitting Guam in the next maybe week. I saw that. So, I mean, it's a difficult situation, but if North Korea hits Guam, then I don't think America is going to tolerate that. I think we will go to war.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, look, if it was with the Obama administration, even I would question whether or not he would go to war, because, during Obama's 8 years in office, his 2 terms, he never really, and, a lot of the past presidents have not really encountered a conflict that is, I mean, for a long time, we haven't had an attack on U.S. soil by a foreign entity. 9/11, it was a terrorist organization, but the last attack on, U.S. territory, U.S. ground with 50 states, was Pearl Harbor, right? So, we haven't had this sort of large-scale conflict. And, maybe Obama would have done it, but I'm certain that with the Trump administration, if there were to be a nuclear attack, not even nuclear, even at ICBM, and even, further threats, because what's really interesting, right, is that North Korea has for a long time continued to make threats over and over and over again, right? We all know that. They continue to make threats. They continue to talk about their nuclear arms programs, their ICBMs, a lot of their military advancements, even though, a lot of that really isn't true. They continue to talk about this, right? And yet they have yet to make any action. And, if Comrade Hecko is right in saying that, in their constitution, whatever that really may be, they won't attack first, it still goes to show you that their whole standing on war is just to ignite conflict with nations. So, leading back to what I was saying, I kind of went off on a tangent. Trump, when he said that hell and fire comment, when he said that comment, he didn't just say, don't, if you attack us, we're going to, bring back hell and fire or whatever. He also, added that if you make any more threats. And, I think the real question is whether or not President Trump is going to stick to that. Because if he is true in saying that whether or not we have any more threats, we are going to go to war with you. We are going to have military combat, even if you threaten us anymore. I think that's really interesting. Because if that's true, and even, any more threats will lead to military conflict, how does that put the United States in a position, especially with conflict in the region? So I'm going to ask you this because someone said this in chat as a question. Kevin said, do you think that if we went to war with Korea, we would also go to war with China? So we kind of talked about this earlier, but let's say in that situation with what Kevin said, let's say that, North Korea gives another threat to us. It seems that they're making progress, and the United States has an attack, whether it be on destroying, their missile launch centers or destroying, some form of their infrastructure. If the United States had the first attack on North Korea, how do you think that China and global politics as a whole would respond to the situation?
Well, I'm also reading the chat right now, and Matt Coat also kind of touched pretty briefly upon this. So, Kevin, to answer your question, do you think if we went to North Korea, we would also go to war with China? I don't think so. I think, Matt Coat, you are onto something. I do think China would cut their looses, but in terms of invading North Korea themselves, that's an iffy topic. I don't think, I think China may, let's look at this like a lot logistically, right? If China were to cut their loose with North Korea, and China kind of isolated North Korea to be attacked by America, and there wasn't any backup coming, then North Korea and China relations would be completely obliterated. And so it makes sense for China to invade North Korea. Do I think that it that they will. I don't think that. I don't think so. They have a history of just being great allies. You know, regardless of North Korea's extremely dangerous developments. And so I don't think that China would necessarily invade North Korea with us. But I do think that you are right in that China would cut their ties with North Korea.
So this brings up
go ahead.
So this brings up a really interesting point. So basically, when we have to think about war in general, it all has to do with politics and the economy, who people think they can take on, and the economic impacts of it, right? If so what I'm coming, this is from the Heritage Foundation. It's from Council on Foreign Relations. They say that in 2014, trade between North Korea and China peaked at about $8.7 billion. And this is important to note because the Korean War itself, estimated for inflation rates, it cost over only a 3-year period about $341 billion to the United States, right? And that was in the 70s, in the 50s. So if we think that China would go to war against the United States and South Korea to protect their financial interests with North Korea, that's just not possible, because even that $8 billion, that would be a couple months, not even a month or two of fighting in the conflict. So just only a month of fighting in the conflict for a small ally that threatens not only China economically, but politically, because they do have nukes, right? They're right next to them. They have nukes. So looking at a political and economic aspect, there's no justification for them to go to war. There's no major reserves in North Korea that they could benefit off of a war. They know that they can't take on the United States and South Korea, because both the United States and China know that they're both major world powers. And if it ends up that one defeats the other, it's either going to be like nuclear fallout, or it's just going to be a country with hundreds of millions, or in the case of China, almost 2 billion people that are just starving and have no leader. So there's no scenario which China, under any justification, would go to war. Let me look at the chat. Do you think that any other country would side with North Korea? What would be North Korea's allies? Well, like I said, if there was more economic justification in between North Korea, tens of billions, hundreds of billions, right? Like a U.S.-China economic relation, maybe China would go to war with North Korea. But North Korea is just, it's not strong politically, maybe a little bit in military, but not socially, not economically. It's not strong at all, right? So if North Korea went into a conflict with South Korea, they wouldn't have any allies. China would not back them. And that leads to the question on what would be the motive for them to go to war? Because, I understand that Kim Jong-un and Kim Il-sung have kept their position over the decades, their power, because of threatening to go to war with countries. Therefore, because of political reasons, no one's wanted to invade them.
Well, let's look at okay.
Yeah.
Okay, well, in terms of like siding with North Korea, let's take a look at North Korea's realistic allies, right? North Korea's the countries that have good tensions, good relations with North Korea. So those are China, Russia, Bulgaria, Benin, and the Congo, right? If you take a look at those, China and Russia are not going to back up North Korea if the war does end up erupting between North Korea and America. That's that historic, that's just a fact. China and Russia will not back up North Korea, and so we take a look at Bulgaria. Bulgaria, maybe it's also very unlikely though. Because Bulgaria is the only ally of North Korea in Europe. Bulgaria did, place a restriction in terms of trade with North Korea, in terms of like coal, iron ore. I don't think Bulgaria would also, it doesn't make sense economically for Bulgaria to engage in a war with or siding with North Korea. And so to answer your question, would anybody side with North Korea? Quite frankly, I don't think so. I don't think North Korea in this situation, I don't think North Korea has any allies in this situation. And so that's why this is such a bad idea, both economically and just logically for North Korea. It's a terrible idea that North Korea is provoking the United States, provoking, our allies as well. And so, this is why it doesn't make sense to me, and it doesn't make sense for, I don't think any of us here. a question here from Christopher. What's going to happen if the USA strikes North Korea back with tactical nukes? Will China attack us? And because radiation goes over into the border in China. That's a good point. That's a good point. China is struggling is really struggling in terms of global radiation, global warming, and they're really struggling in terms of controlling that amount. So that they bring up a really good point. So will China retaliate against the U.S. for radiation going into China? That's a good question, but to answer it, I don't think it's a big enough motivator for China to provoke the United States. Let's look at this, from a wide angle of let's look at this from a wide scope of goggles, right? North Korea is unnecessarily provoking the United States and be doing this constantly nonstop since let's date it back to 94, right, or to 98, let's say, because that's when the nuclear arms deal was cut off by Congress. Would China retaliate in the United States? It's much more of a bigger problem right now between North Korea versus the world versus China being motivated by only a climate factor. So would China be upset? Yes, but I don't think China, like we mentioned before, I don't think China is going to side with North Korea. So there's logistically no reason economically either for China to side with North Korea. So I don't think that China would retaliate against us. They would remain completely neutral. Would China be upset with us? Maybe, but I think that's going to be overpowered by their disappointment in North Korea.
Mm-hmm. And what I will say, just to finish up on this topic with the impact of China in the war. So I think that if we were to go to conflict, because you have to understand that what we consider what we deem today, whether it be through human rights or just rights of anyone, what we deem socially acceptable today was a lot different 50 years ago. We can't just go out and bomb a nation. It's a lot of international scrutiny that could meet us. I believe that if the United States was going to go to war with North Korea and South Korea, right? I believe that if he was going to go to war with him, with North Korea, that it would not be nuclear combat, because we're trying to, obviously there's justification for going to North Korea. One, to eliminate, Kim Jong-un in the Kim dynasty, but it's also to liberate the North Korean people. And that's what I've always said about, going to North Korea. We want to liberate the North Korean people. But if there would, I feel that the strategy taken by the United States, because we're not stupid, mostly, our strategy would be that we would, destroy once again where they launch off their missiles and their potential nuclear warheads, and that we would have a ground invasion. I don't think there'd be any spillover, whether it be nuclear or just war combat wise. I don't think there's gonna be any spillover into China. So something I just want to quickly bring up, Comrade Hecko, the person that he's talking about who wants this debate, he isn't North Korean, but he lives in North Korea. He has, as he said, he has, I think, Skype, Instagram, Facebook from North Korea. He lives in North Korea. Whether or not he's North Korean, if he is a diplomat, if he works with organizations, you can't tell me that he's going to badmouth them. It's ridiculous. It really is. I mean, I can't believe anyone would think that like, oh, okay, if a Nazi sympathizer is like, let me try to justify Adolf Hitler. Don't worry, I live in Nazi Germany. He's a great guy. Like, that's not gonna make me change my mind that he's not a great guy. It's not gonna happen. As for
Matt Code asked a question earlier.
Matt Code. How dedicated is North Korean people for their cause? Are they going to fight to the death like the Japanese? Now, here's the thing, right? With the Japanese, in World War II, they didn't have restricted media. They understood what was going on with conflict. They understood the fight that was going on. I think that, the brainwashing, or not really, I wouldn't say brainwashing, but conditioning of North Korean citizens, it leads them to be more susceptible to outside information. But, the Japanese in North Korea are two very different scenarios. One, Japanese has so much more firepower, and they controlled a large part of the Pacific for a period of time, and they were, open to understanding what was going on in the world. North Korea is very malnourished. They have military that's malnourished. They don't have a lot of weaponry outside of their nukes that they threaten us with. They don't have the outside information. So it wouldn't, because we have to understand that Japanese was a global power. It was an Axis power. They were taking over the Pacific, and they were doing a lot of damage. Maybe in talking about how the citizens will fight to the death, maybe. But I think for a lot of them, if we get rid of their missile and their nuclear threat, if we reading the comment,
I think that more people disapprove of the North Korean government in North Korea than people that do approve.
I hope so.
Of the Korean government. Yeah, I mean it's a wild assumption, but I really do hope so because for all the reasons that we stated earlier. But I mean North Korea.
You want to address some of Hecko's points?
I don't know what he's saying. Debate, Jason.
He said you indeed have studied North Korean history. You indeed are an expert in the field of socialism, how the North Korean government works. So maybe
you're right. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. The North Korean government is an absolute joke. They're not.
Right. And just to quickly say, if you're trying to give if you're trying to give North Korea as an example of socialism working, I promise it's not working out for you, bud. But continue. Go on.
Actual historical text of the DPRK. All right, let me ask you, do you really think that a government, from a government that controls everything that comes in and out of the government in terms of media, in terms of knowledge, in terms of education, do you really think that a historical text from the DPRK is going to accurately describe and accurately tell me what the hell is actually going on in North Korea? I don't think so. I think you're looking at a third-party source looking into America and its situation is much more reliable than reading some biased ass shit. It doesn't work. It's not working. Are you kidding me? Do you know how many people are malnourished in North Korea? Do you know how failed the government is? Do you know how the economy is doing right now? Do you know how isolated they are in the Pacific? Do you know how many countries absolutely want to bomb the shit out of them? Honestly, look at this.
If you really think that if the multiple examples you try to get from North Korea, because if you don't want to believe the many, not only the physical, the speaking evidence, but the physical evidence that people bring back from their trips to North Korea, right? If you don't want to believe the physical evidence in front of you, you instead want to say, don't worry, they're well fed. Don't worry, they have freedom of speech, which is something that he said. Don't worry. If you want to keep saying that, they have all these freedoms, and then the only citation that you prove is people from North Korea who have guns to their head trying to tell you how North Korea is, obviously, there's going to be some bias there. All the evidence that we have now, whether it be through Otto Warmbier getting tortured with chemicals and dying once he got back to the United States, whether it be through the video evidence of the top scrutiny, the malnourishment that photographers and videographers that go over there, they see it. All this evidence is against you. The economy hasn't been improving since 1991. There is no improvement. It's an isolated nation that has very little economic ties. It actually in 2014 was the highest trade that they had was just $8 billion, right? There's a reason why almost every single country in the world, keep in mind the ones that are westernized and are, sane in context, that's why no one wants to have any economic relations with them. That's why no one wants to have ties with them. It's not because, they're a great country. They're very utopian, freedom of speech, great country, very nourished, very great economic. No, you're wrong. It's just, you're face value wrong if you truly believe that the only evidence that we have is North Korea. I mean, look, I really can't attempt to even start, and we can't attempt to start addressing the fallacy in your argument saying this person who lives there under the government we know to be so strict, he must be or she must be telling the truth.
Right. And I also kind of want to respond to what Comrade is saying. He said, go to liberationnews.org. Liberation News is a well-known news site to be posting socialist propaganda and advocating, both Nazi Germany regime, North Korea, and the Soviet Union. So I don't think that your source on that is reliable either.
Right. Okay. So, and just to finish off, he says people have actually been to North Korea, and some on the internet who doesn't know anything about socialism, North Korean history, are the leaders. First off, look. I'd love to have the debate with you, Comrade, and we may have to do that on here sometime. But you giving me citations of one or two people who have come back and said, and because I've read that before, and it says, it's not as bad as you may think. It's not justifying it as a great nation. It's just saying, oh, it's not as bad. It's a common misconception. People think it's terrible. It's not horrible. If one or two people say that, I mean, every single example in history, whether it be through anything in history, it always has people on both sides who make claims, right? In any scenario, whatever it may be, there's always people on both sides, right, who are going to be saying these certain things. And if you have a majority of people coming back from the country and a majority of evidence by the government, just by their activities, by what they do, if you have all this evidence that points to the very obvious conclusion that we know for certain is that North Korea is a terrible, terrible government and it's a terrible country, you can't make any claims. And so to end off, Kevin, why don't you take a trip to North Korea? Honestly, Kevin, I would, but I don't want to get caught, doing something very petty and then being chemically tortured and then come back to the United States only to die and have people like Comrade Hecko, who lives in the United States, tell me that I am wrong on my stance on North Korea. So with that, thank you guys for joining us. We appreciate it.
Oh my God.
Did you end it? Oh my God.